Hello, hello, hello. I am your host, Tracy Otsuka. Thank you so much for joining me here for another episode of ADHD for Smartass Women. You know that my purpose is always to show you who you are and then inspire you to be it. And in the thousands of women with ADHD that I've had the privilege of meeting, I've never met a one that wasn't truly brilliant at something, not one. So, of course, I am just delighted to introduce you to Anna. Anna Rahe is an ADHD entrepreneur who, for the past 25 years, has run a successful business teaching fascia health and wellness. As the founder of GST Body, she's built a thriving business and helped 10,000 plus people find lasting change by restoring their bodies, including celebrities like Robert Downey Jr., Emmy Rossum, and Charlie Hunnam. Anna has spoken about holistic body care through fascia around the world, partnered with top athletes, surgeons, physicians, and celebrities, and been featured in various publications from Shape to Elle, Net-a-Porter to the Wall Street Journal. She was born in the US but grew up in Hobart, Australia, and now lives in Boulder, Colorado with her husband and 3 kids. Anna, did I get all that right?
That's impressive.
So I want to learn all about fascia, but where we always start is to talk about your ADHD journey first. So would you mind sharing with us a bit of your
Yeah.
ADHD origin story?
You know what's really funny is that they actually go together because I really credit the creation and discovery of GST to my ADHD. And we'll go into why fascia plays a really central role in the kind of brain that I have and how I was able to make these kind of really deep connections. But I was 18. I had always had like kind of learning differences. I'd been in and out of tutoring programs. And I think really early on, both of my parents were highly educated professors, and they noticed that I needed some extra support. And my dad would do math with me, and they were really patient and, were helping me. And I went to Sylvan Learning Center and, but I didn't actually discover that I was ADHD until I was 21. And so I struggled through school. I almost didn't go to college because I was like, this is too hard. I want to be a dancer. Why am I doing this? And in the summer of 2000, we were down in Australia just having a vacation. And my mom's like, I want you to take this test. It's about ADHD. And I was like, why? And she's like, well, I gave it to your father because I think he is ADHD and he failed the test. And I'm like, what does that mean? She's like, well, he said that he didn't have ADHD. All of his results were that he didn't have it. And I was like, okay. Well, she said, so I want you to take the test for him, what you see your dad to be like. And I said, okay. So we sat down. I have 3 sisters. The 4 girls sat down and took an ADHD test for my dad, not for me. And halfway through it, it's a 75 really question, very specific test for ADHD that my mom had gotten from a specialist. And halfway through it, I'm like, this sounds like me. This sounds like me. This sounds like me. And so I started to say, Mom, can I just take the test for me? And she's like, sure, you can take the test for you. So I took the test on my own regard after doing it for my dad. I did give my dad a score of ADHD. He is definitely ADHD, which is where I get it from. But I took the test, and then I ended up going into one of the leading professionals. He's not in a clinical setting anymore, but he was in Denver. And he gave me a litany of tests above a questionnaire. Like, I don't draw very well in 3-dimensional space. That's a big sign of ADHD. And he had all these little things he had me do. And finally, he's like, here's your prescription. And I was like, oh, okay, I'm going to take Adderall. And that summer, literally, my life was radically changed. I went from going into I was going to the Front Range or a community college in San Francisco at the time, and I was struggling so hard to get a 2.8 grade point average. I would study with people, and I'd have to do it twice as long. And I literally got my Adderall, and I went onto the dean's and honors list, graduating summa cum laude from USF, the actual 4-year, Jesuit school in San Francisco, in one semester. And so really, I never had a doubt. Once I got my Adderall, I remember the day that I called my mom and I'm like, Mom, I think it's working. I literally just sat here for 2 hours. I didn't clip my cuticles. I didn't get up and do this and do this. And it was like almost having, not being able to see for 21 years. And then all of a sudden Adderall came in and was like, I could see. I could literally, like, things were clear and I could remember things and I had, coherence through things. And so, ironically, this collided with a time in my life that I'd been through some really intensive, deep trauma therapy for some childhood sexual abuse that I had suffered and an eating disorder that I had kind of gotten. And in this summer of healing, I did all this deep psychological work, and I came back from that time in the mountains doing this work. And my body is when my body started expressing severe pain, digestive issues, like all my like physical ailments started to flare up. So after I did the psychological work in myself, I had been in therapy since I was 14, but I really committed to it for my own journey. After you actually heal the fractures of the psyche, your body still contains a lot of the trauma in the tissues. And I didn't know it at the time, but this is where this ADHD kind of like actually served me, because in this summer is when I was also diagnosed with my medicine, and it gave me the ability to lay down and figure out what was wrong with me, because doctors could not tell me what was happening. And I didn't understand why these symptoms were flaring up. I didn't understand how they were connected. I didn't know that they were connected. It just felt like I was I wasn't actually 21 at the time. I must have been 18 at the time, 19. So I had this incredible summer of healing where I lived in a mountain cabin outside of the Rocky Mountain National Park for 3 months. And I went into deep therapy, really committed to healing the fractures that trauma caused me. And during this time, I was focused mostly on my psychology and not my physicality. But I went back to California after this summer feeling like, way less depressed about, my life and what I was trying to do with my life. And when I got back to San Francisco is when my symptoms, my physical symptoms set in. And I think that that's significant because of the role that trauma plays in fascia, but also in terms of healing, the somatic healing. Oftentimes we don't take the trauma we experience and put it back into where it was first afflicted, where it first entered our system. Anyway, so my body's like, your mind is strong enough, your heart is healing, let's douse you with, now you're ready to actually deal with this deeper stuff that's afflicting your body. And so that is when I started realizing that I needed to figure out. So I went to all these doctors and I had very diverse symptoms. I had symptoms that were in my, tissue, like I was sore, like I'd done the hardest workout in my life. And then I had symptoms of digestive, gastrointestinal issues. And then I had the scariest one was with my lungs and my respiratory system. One day I would go out running and be like a well-conditioned athlete as I was a dancer and I was really 18 and healthy. And then literally 2 days later I would do the same run and my lungs would feel like I was a 10-pack-a-day smoker. They would like give me bronchial, enhancers and all kinds of things. And they couldn't figure out what was going on. And so I was insomniatic. I was, still suffering some from depression, but it would become severe when my symptoms would flare up. And at one point I just said, I have to figure out what is happening to me. I'm too young to feel this old. I'm too young to have these health problems. And that's when my ADHD clicked in, and this point of like hyper focus and this desire to find a solution. And an ADHD mind is really good at Rubik's cubes, right? Of like putting and seeing themes together and making connections. So I kind of laugh that I pretty much hacked the most complicated body system with my ADHD brain, right? It's what allowed me to go in and really do what doctors couldn't do, what therapists couldn't do. I did for myself, laying there for 3-4 hours at a time, being like, if I do this, I get this reprieve. If I do this, then I can get this. And I started to put together this very complicated body system that people didn't have answers for and didn't know what it was. And I attribute it all to my ADHD. If I hadn't discovered that and hadn't gotten Adderall, I wouldn't have had the bandwidth to be able to figure out how to heal myself.
So none of the therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, nobody talked about that trauma gets trapped in the body. It was just all about take the medication and do the talk therapy.
That's kind of right. Analysis, paralysis doesn't really go anywhere. And then medicine will mask it, right? You don't go back to source. Ironically, I had been at this time, it was also confusing because I was certified in 3 different Pilates methods. I was a yoga teacher. I was like a, semi-professional. I was trying to be a professional dancer. And I learned about fascia by one course. One night in my studio, it kind of goes like this. I was like, what is going on? What's happening? What's involved in this? It's not muscles. I can move. I can stretch. It's not bones. I'm like, what else is there that could be involved in these problems? And a little note in the back of my head was like, could it be fascia? And I had taken one workshop in my Pilates certification, and it was on somatics. It was by this woman who was a rolfer, and the workshop wasn't really about everything that I'm attracted to fascia about, but it was really about reading body imprints, body posturing and torsion based upon personality and based upon emotional trauma. And so it was a lot more analysis about like my legs are like this because I, had this trauma or something, or my pelvis is twisted because. So I had that introduction, but it didn't really seep into me being like, and I don't know that all my trauma caused my fascial dysfunction, right? Like some of it's genetic, some of it's, it's a bigger story. Go ahead.
So, fascia. What is fascia? I'm sure most of us don't know.
That's right. Most people do not know what fascia is. So fascia is this really, really cool body tissue. Okay. And we can talk about it in 2 ways. One is just as a tissue, like saying my shirt is cotton. You can say the body's held together from fascia, a type of connective tissue. And I like it like that, but it's actually more significant to our health and our wellness and our total body, being when you look at it as a whole body system, not just a type of tissue, not set apart from, but in context to the whole. So fascia has an entire body system complete with its own organs. And these organs are not organs like the heart and the mast like lungs and your intestines. They're layered organs. They're actually thin sheets that wrap around almost more like kind of a gel gooey cellophane that's connecting everything together. But there's an organ of fascia, the way it organizes around your endocrine system. There's an organ of fascia, the way it wraps around your muscles. That's what most people are familiar with, is the myofascia, which is just the organ of fascia around your musculoskeletal system. You have your viscera, and that's the organ of fascia that wraps around your vital organs. And so all of a sudden, fascia becomes really significant because it does all of these processes in support of these other systems. That's why, in a lot of ways, that it's connected to our trauma, because it responds to our adrenal stress, responds to our endorphin responses, it responds to our vascular health, it responds to our gut health. And so it's very biologically active, and it's everywhere. So it's involved in everything. And so when if your listener was trying to picture this, if you were to dissect the body and open it up, fascia looks like this very delicate, gooey, spider web-like tissue that is covering in white glazy over everything. And for years, doctors and anatomists would dissect the body and cut away the connective tissue because it seems superfluous. They were like, oh, let's get to the heart. That's a cool organ. Or let's get to the guts. That's what look at this tumor. So we were kind of really into the big rather than into the small and sophisticated. And it turns out it's one of the most significant systems that we have. And it does a lot of things for us and is involved in everything from our mental health to our physical and our physiological health, cellular reproduction, autoimmune disease, a bunch of different things.
So I had a frozen shoulder.
Oh,
years
those
ago.
are some of my favorites.
I think it was right when Donald Trump was elected. And I remember them saying, and it felt like literally saran wrap around my shoulder. And so when it started to freeze, of course, we do what we normally do, right? We try to keep it safe. We try to keep it immobile because I was afraid there was something wrong. And ultimately, what I needed to do was to almost tear it back out so that I could move again. And it wasn't, and I think I had that thing for 8 months. And I remember reading that a lot of people never recover from it. But once I understood it was this saran wrap over my shoulder, and I started to literally try to tear it off, then I was able to completely recover from it. Was that fascia?
Perfect. That's fascia. Totally. Totally. It's one of my
Wow.
favorite frozen shoulders, ironically, is one of my favorite things to fix. It's quite easy to fix, but it's really a fascial dysfunction of imbalance in the tissues, ossification, which is when fascia becomes more like bone. So yeah, the fact that you had in the intuition to actually like push through it and start to get ranges of motion, motion heals fascia. And that's why I went from when I discovered fascia, it was really only in manual therapists' hands. Some physical
Mm-hmm.
therapists would talk about it, but not much. This is 25 years ago, right? So you'd go
Mm-hmm.
in and someone else always had to do it for you. And what I was experiencing is I'm like, my fascia is so effed up that there's no amount of money that I can go 4 times a week to have you do it for me. I'm like, I have to figure out how to do it for myself. And so I realized that it was through motion because my poor motion, being a dancer, being a runner, all the things that I was taught in Pilates and yoga would actually flare up my symptoms. And when I would do the things that felt good and would heal that fascia, it was totally different than what I was told to do in movement. And so you were really wise in following that intuitive hit that fascia needs movement to optimize, heal, and function appropriately. It's movement, not manual therapy. There's similar elements, but you can't provide enough pressure with manual therapy. You can't do it often enough. Our movement is the greatest influencer of our fascia. So any gains that you get from therapy usually are lost within a couple days of you moving in movement patterns that are not changed.
I did some research on when I had the frozen shoulder when it wasn't healing. I remember talking to every doctor, every physical therapist that I could, asking, where does this come from? And they all were like, we don't know. We have no idea. Well, in the research that I did, I found out that in Japan, this is actually really common. I'm half Japanese, and they call it 50 shoulder because it's related to hormones. And then when I went
Interesting.
back to the doctors and asked them about that, they're like, no, we haven't heard anything about that. And I am absolutely convinced it was hormone related.
Totally. That makes so much sense, especially because women start to really lose their estrogen levels and it affects fascia. Fascia is extremely sensitive to hormonal fluctuations.
Yep.
There's an amazing research. I want to get the actual name of the research that was done.
Hmm.
It's out of Italy. And it was talking about why women suffer more severely from fascial dysfunctions than men do. And they were studying the different responses to estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all of those like strong responses. And it makes sense. I mean, that's perimenopausal or even menopause for most women. And so their tissues start to change drastically.
Absolutely. And I am so sensitive to fluctuations in hormones, and I always have been.
You think that comes down to a little bit of your sensitivity, of ADHD sensitivity?
Well, we tend to be hypersensitive, right? Around a
Yeah.
lot of things.
Yeah.
But I remember even as a very young teen, 13 years old, when everybody else was like so excited to get their period. And I remember thinking, I want no part of this. I want nothing. And I think the reason was I felt like everything changed once that happened.
Oh,
I
interesting.
could never take birth control pills. I am just really sensitive to hormone fluctuations. I did not feel good during that period of time. And so that's
That's
why, I
interesting.
wanted nothing to do with it. The time coming up to it, and then, right after that until
90%
things
of your
started to
life is
balance.
hormonally like, yeah, that's really funny. I
Yeah,
want nothing to do with it.
exactly. Okay, so can you explain to us? I'm fascinated by this whole fascia, this whole idea of fascia, which nobody talks about.
It's
Can
true.
you explain how fascia, what I should say is the mainstream doesn't talk about? Because there is quite a bit of research and information, but
And
nobody
it's
seems to
coming
know
more.
about
Yeah.
it. Can you explain how fascia therapy works?
Yeah. Sure. Best I can. So there's a bunch of different fascial therapies, right? Fascia is extremely responsive to what we call loading. Okay, that can be chemical loading from hormones, right, in your body and your endocrine responses. And it also can be from mechanical loading. Okay, and you can mechanically load by how you squeeze or how you twist or how you push, compression. And so fascia is very responsive. It reacts to the different loads because its primary force is to move energetics. It's your energetic body system, like your smart grid, the smart grid on the planet that like regulates energy usage. Well, fascia does that for your body, and it uses hydroelectric activity on this like framework of a fiber base. That's why it's like a netting almost. And so it takes our stresses and loads and distributes them and modulates the energy that comes off of those influences. And so when you want to do a fascial therapy, you're usually trying to apply some type of pressure, some type of input of load to try to manipulate fascial response so that you can clear energy in an area or open the fibers so that there's more energy that can move through. You can restructure how fibers are oriented to be able to restore health. So it's kind of like a spectrum. When you look at fascia health, it's like there's this optimized state, and then there's like different levels of dysfunction. And so like a first level of dysfunction is like sticky and not gliding and not lubricated. And then if you keep having that condition, it pulls on the fibers and causes too much friction and too much agitation. And then it starts to get rigid and hold more like glue, almost like having too much hairspray in your hair or hair gel. And if that's not dealt with in a certain area, that lack of freedom will actually pull from other areas and stress the load of other parts of the net, the body-wide net. And then you can get like what's called fibrosis, and that's when it becomes really rigid and almost more tendon and dense-like. It's almost like a callus on the inside of you. And then another layer is when it gets into called ossification, and that's like kind of the worst state that it can be at, where it almost is bone-like, when fascia has lost all of its hydration, all of its flexibility, all of its agility and ability to move its individuation of its fibers. It locks down and will actually shut down certain areas of the body energetically, and that's when a lot of pain and stuff and dysfunction comes in. Adhesions are a different type of fascial dysfunction. That's when you actually cut and tear. It's almost like the difference between a callus and then when you like make an adhesion is what happens in surgery. So you like cut for a C-section and then you have to sew it back up, and soft tissue does not repair in perfect alignment because it needs so much pull and stretch and many diverse movement options. And so adhesions can form, but that can lead to all those other dysfunctions in fascia. So the goal of fascial therapy is really on one level or another trying to alleviate the loads, manipulate the loads on fascia to stimulate the natural organic process that fascia has for using hydraulics, like getting water into the tissues so that they separate. For the listener, it's kind of almost like bad fascia, unhealthy, fascia is like dried ramen noodles. And what you want to do is add that hot water, and then you need to, kind of mix it in, and then the noodles get softer, and then they can separate, and then you can pull them, and then you can have, agility with them. And so that need for hydration is what keeps the optimization of the fascia being able to glide and, move freely. And that's really the goal of most therapies, is to make sure that the fascia is moving effectively so that energy is moving effectively in the body.
So when we say that trauma gets stored in the body, it gets stuck in the body, are you really saying where it gets stuck is in the fascia? Is that where it happens?
That's right. That's right.
Wow. And did you also say that women have more problems with fascia than men typically?
Typically, yes. Typically, yes. And it has to do a lot with our hormone systems, right? It's much more volatile because fascia just responds to all this type of loading. And we have much more dynamic hormonal loading in our bodies. And so you'll notice that a lot of women will have severe flare-ups according to their hormone cycles each month. And that's where trauma really is the brain's interpretation of our experiences through chemicals. They make a chemical cocktail of experience, and it's sent through the tissues, and fascia will contract and bind and hold based upon those type of influences.
I wonder with women too, if it is also related, I mean, it's hormones clearly, but also trauma. And I'm thinking of all those mystery illnesses, the inflammatory diseases, the autoimmune diseases. Like, why do women have so many more of those kinds of diseases, right? You go to the doctor, oh, it's
Yeah.
all in your head. They can't, you have nothing. We can't figure out what it is, but you feel like crap, right? So do you have clients that literally they come to you because they have these mystery illnesses or a named illness, an inflammatory, disease or an autoimmune disease, that go through this fascia therapy and are actually healed
Yes.
when no one else can help them?
Yes. I mean, that's kind of the people that I end up attracting because fascia is so different and new. And it's usually I'm the last stop on people's long list of, I tried this, I tried this, I tried this. And that's what's exciting about fascia is because it's a new, it's a new lens. It's a new frontier, literally, where it's like, we're still discovering things, but here's a very new way of looking at this. And it's so opposite that's why it's usually effective. And when I say opposite, fascia gets really interesting when you start to look at its composite nature. It is more of a fluid. It's 70% water and 30% fiber. And so when we start dealing with the human body, most of our medical history is based in the idea that the body is a solid, the solvent, not the solute, right? In biology and or in chemistry, I mean. And so we treat medicine looking at the body as it is a solid and that we diagnose based upon a solid body model. And fascia says, actually, no, we're not a solid body, you're a fluid body. And when you do that, you actually are changing all of the sciences that actually go into the study of that substance. The laws of physics that affect fascia behave very differently. One of the things that this comes out with women who come in here and it usually shows up at 40s, 45, and then if they haven't found a solution, they'll come in with some serious problems because they haven't had these other underlying symptoms dealt with. But they come in and they're like years of hardcore ab work and trying to get flat tummies and locking their body down into tone and svelte thinness. And these are all principles of a solid body, right? We look at the body and we say, oh, that fleshy middle, that's a mistake in design. That's weak and it makes our torso weak. We should make it rigid and like solid. And it's like, wait a second, that alone really fucks up women, especially hormonally, because that's where all your ovaries are. That's where your uterus is. That's the biggest channel. It's called the flow field of estrogen that comes from the endocrine system, is fed through the tissues in that area and saturates the tissues when you're having peaks, like during your luteinizing phase in your period. And so all of a sudden, when you lock all the fibers down, think about like taking a net and literally gluing the fibers together. All of those hormones that are supposed to flow through there and actually distribute through the tissues is actually pooling. It's almost like a tide pool, which makes it not accessible for rapid distribution, which it needs to, and dilution. Distribution of hormones is the diluting of it. It's how it's delivered through the body. And so when the meshing the delivery system is like gunged up, it really messes up. And so we have to kind of go back and re-identify for women about the body a different science, a different perspective. And that's why I think that GST and fascial work is so significant, because it's literally taking everything we know and telling them to do the opposite. And this is the point, is that most of our sicknesses are because we're in a habit of doing one thing and one way only. And if you live in extremes, fascia is like a really wise, body counsel. It's like hates extremes. It's like the king of moderation. Not too much, not too little, right down the middle. It teaches us how to live a balanced body, how to live a balanced life, if you follow these principles. And so people come in and they've been doing these really like 20 million sit-ups and trying to get their legs toned and trying the stress of being a mom and not having these like coping skills, and it's all etched into their body, into their holding patterns, into their stuff. And then they're like, the doctors and the PTs who they go to are like, oh, we still need you to do more sit-ups for your low back pain or your knee pain, or we really need to actually lock down your core. But then they're like, my digestion is off. I've got tummy fat. What is going on? And we're like, okay, what if you actually made your torso the most mobile part of you? Fascia says that your spine and your body, your torso, should be the most open and mobile part of who you are. And when you do that, the endocrine channel, which runs the entire length of your central nervous system, every endocrine organ or gland is in the channel that shares the same center of your spine. And so it's like we lock that down, and then we're like, why are our hormones so off? Why are my organs, showing signs of dysfunction? My viscera, my fascia in my organs is not able to have peristalsis and motility. And so my microbiome changes, which changes my hormones. I mean, what fascia is saying to us is you have to change the perspective because everything is interconnected. Everything is related.
So when you say you take everything we know and
Yes.
we're doing the exact opposite. So what does that actually physically look like in fascia therapy? I know it's mobility,
Yes. Mobility is a
but
huge
not
one, right?
more.
Yes.
Yeah. And I noticed, like, I was on your Instagram, which is fascinating, and you're always talking, not always, but most of the time you're talking about the spine.
That's right. That's right. Because it's the central nervous system. It's the mainframe channel of body communication, right? It houses the most important information for your body operation and health. Even like you shutting down your spine can actually lead to depression and brain fog. So the spine is not addressed enough, neither is the rib cage. That's another one of my missions, is to get people to understand the ribs because they're related to your lungs, which is related to your stress states, directly related to stress states. I want to be very clear just because what I do is actually very different than most fascial therapies. So most fascial therapy is really targeting the myofascia, the fascia of the musculoskeletal system. Okay. And they like to go in, and you can do it with rollers, you can do it with thumpers, you can do it with shake plates, you can do it with deep massage, manual therapies. You go in and you manipulate tissue by doing load exchange, input exchange to the tissues. And that's what most therapy, and that's what people are doing when they're doing cross training athletes. When people have headaches, they'll go in. You can address some parts of fascia with cranial sacral stuff. There's this stuff called fascial stretch therapy. Fascia loves to stretch, but it's only one side of the equation. So we have to go back to, and this is kind of what comes back to my thing. So fascia therapy, then there's osteopathic medicine. And osteopathic medicine focuses less on the musculoskeletal system. I'm making some generalities here. So if you're listening and you're a fascial therapist, don't be upset. I'm trying to make it simple for people. But osteopathic medicine really focuses on manual visceral manipulation, like working with the fascia of the organs to set up and heal more of the deep structural tissues, because there's just different types of tissues, right? You have a type of fascia that's like cotton. It's everyday wear. That's like your myofascia that you wear every day, and it's rugged and it's sturdy. But the viscera, the organ of fascia that's around your organs, is like sateen and silk, like a silk thing. And it's very delicate, and it needs a different type of manipulation. So when people are going in, usually you go through the musculoskeletal system or you go through the organ system. But there's a lot of other, because it's reaching all different things, there's other different ways in. One of the things that people need to realize is that not all movement targets fascia. Fascia is very specific about how it's going to react, and it's very adaptive. So it needs a lot of diversity, a lot of dynamics. Like you can't just do 100 reps. You're not accessing fascia. In fact, you're damaging it. And that's another discussion of how our movement is damaging fascia. But in the second part of the conversation, think about it this way. Almost all alternative and integrative specialist body care therapists are only using 3 tools, okay, when they're trying to take care of the body. They use a lever, which is just a stick. They push force through the lever, their hands, your joints, to get flow. Leverage, force, flow. A chiropractor uses your body to configure levers into a shape drops weight in to get movement and flow through your joint. A massage therapist uses their lever of their arm to push into you, to manipulate the soft tissues to get more energy to flow. Acupuncturists use the small lever of a needle to stick it into your meridian to get chi to flow. So every discipline is using the same tools. The difference is that your body has 5 levers, your spine plus each limb. You can configure that in every workout or every movement you do. Every lifestyle action has a configuration of tension, and then we need to keep the fascia flowing. And so it's something that people need to be empowered to do for themselves rather than only from a therapeutic standpoint. It has to be a daily lifestyle hygiene type thing where you do these things to take care of your fascia as an active participant rather than a passive recipient of therapy. I like to go to people to help me with like stuck places, but on a daily basis, I do it myself. Like, you don't go to the dentist every time you need to brush your teeth, right? Think about the ways that we apply this is that we have to learn our own bodies and our own health so that we can do something daily to take care of it. And that's where GST and whole body, like, we don't just address the muscular skeletal system, we actually use those tools to manipulate every system in the body through fascia.
Can you tell us, how do you think fascia therapy can be particularly helpful for those of us with ADHD? Why do we need it more than anyone?
So good. So good. ADHD brains require a lot of sensory input to stay satisfied, satiated, and calm. The brain of an ADHD woman is a busy place to be in. And it's not a matter of calming the busy, it's a matter of organizing the busy, right? You don't want to try to take away the activity because it's our superhero power. You don't want to eliminate the creative forces that are colliding in an ADHD brain. You want to direct them. And what's really interesting is the way that fascia and the nervous system actually interface. And it's very much like the brain is the organ of mind consciousness, while the fascia is the organ of body consciousness. And they actually interface, very interesting, and they share certain commonalities in terms of like neuroplasticity is like fascial plasticity. The ways that we change our brain is the way that we change our bodies. It's the same principles, and I won't go into all of the science of it. But for a woman who's ADHD and doesn't want to meditate and cannot calm the brain, the best way to do it is to lock into the interface of your body and actually use your body to generate the connections of calm that can come to your senses. So it's almost like the body and fascia with its sensory input becomes the vehicle for channeling and organizing our thoughts. There's a calming effect when the somatic can actually react to the psychic, right? The psychic energy of the brain and the mind. And so when you use your body once a day, your body becomes kind of like a totem of calming experience. Your workout becomes your channel. My body, people would always say, don't you meditate? Because you seem really deep. And, I'm like, no, actually, I never really meditated because my brain was too busy. But why I could do it is I would jump into my body and I would start directing my thoughts and organizing myself around this kind of like whole body, whole being continuum. And that is the benefit to an ADHD mind is don't turn your mind off. Give it really high precision, high nutrient rich channeling, ways to actually organize, not obliterate the thought patterns.
This makes so much sense because we know we feel better when we move, right?
We totally
do. Often can't do the things we need to do unless we can move. But now when I go on your Instagram, the movements that it's weird. It's not the things that people know, it's not the sit-ups, right?
Yep.
It's not the strengthening.
It's not the bicep curls. That's right.
It's twisting and contorting your body in different ways. And it's always like that spine, right?
It's
Moving
the
the
spine
spine.
is the motivator. The spine is the motivator of all motion, and that your limbs end up becoming kind of like the ribbons on a maypole or the fly line off of a fly rod when you're fishing. It's almost like your spine contracts and acts and then it expresses through the limbs. But the reason that the GST movements look so different is because number one, they were created to do a very specific thing in fascia. I desperately needed to change my body, and fascia would not get changed by the traditional workouts that I did. Even my dance would damage it. So one thing that I like to do with podcasts is help readers be like the so what factor. Like all of this is so fascinating, but what can I do? How can I do it? And so I try to do a mini lesson on what fascia is and how your movement is going to mimic this. So if I can take 2 seconds and do that, that would be good. So when you think about fascia, you want to think it's 70% water, 30% fiber, and it's organized into these kind of like tubes, from nanotubes around like cellular structures all the way up to like the tubes of your legs and your sticks and the muscles that it surrounds and channels through. And the best way for the reader or listener to understand this is like a Chinese finger toy, where it's like a woven plastic toy. You put your fingers in, it shortens and it loosens. And then you pull your fingers and it tightens and you can't get your fingers out. Okay. This is an action of what fascia does. Fascia, because it's a fluid, works on fluid dynamics and hydraulics. If you're not familiar with old physics and you forget it from high school, a syringe is the most simple, basic element of hydraulics. A syringe, you push it and then you pull it and it pulls fluid in. You push it and it moves the fluid out. You pull it and it moves the fluid in. You push it and it moves the fluid out. And this is all of the body movements. We're tubes, we're not sticks. Fascia says you're actually more like a water balloon being hurled through the air than you are a stick being tossed for a dog. And so when you go into looking at what kind of movements ADHD women and all women and men need to do, it's based upon this simple hydraulic action. So I break it down. There's 3 different movements you need to do. One is called compression. It's pushing the finger toys together and it loosens fibers. Then you pull your fingers apart and it tightens them. This is how actually fascia builds strength without tightness, is that you get strength by lengthening fascia rather than most muscles get strength by shortening. So it's a completely different, talking about opposites, a different approach. So you pull your fingers in the Chinese finger toy, that's traction. And then the third action is called rotation, and that's what you were commenting on the Instagram post, is that you see a lot of spinal rotation and tissue torsion. This compression, traction, rotation is akin to your fascia to taking a hand wash sweater. You dunk it in the water bin. That's compression. You pull it out and all the water pulls down the fibers. That's traction. Then you wring it out and it de-stresses and it detoxifies your fibers. And so every movement that you do in a workout, in your movements daily, has to have compression, traction, and rotation. It's a washing action. It purifies your tissues and keeps them healthy. And so what does this look like? The first thing that you do in the morning is you walk to your kitchen sink and put your toes against the baseboard of your cabinets. You hold onto your kitchen sink and you pull your butt back like you're going to water ski and you let your chest drop. This is called traction. You're trying to pull the fibers and lengthen them, get the spine to open and the vertebra to decompress. Then you come forward and you arch against the sink and you kind of do a cobra, a standing cobra. And this is lengthening and pulling really those fibers through what we just dunked and they pull. Then you pull back again and you change and you hang and try to squat. Try to get your butt to touch your heels this time and do a compression move. And then you pull your legs back and you straighten your body and you come up and arch into a cobra. So we're taking the tubes of your body and going compression and traction. And it feels so good. Then you let go of your kitchen sink and you just take your arms, very simply, keep your rib cage lifted. Do not let your ribs and your chest drop. Keep it lifted. And then rotate your spine right and left, just twisting. Look over like you're twisting to back up in your car. Look over to the left and you rotate. If you learn those 3 actions, and they're all over my YouTube, they're all over my Instagram, you'll see those 3 actions. Then the listener's goal is to do this. Fascia says, I do not want to eat one huge meal of movement a day. I don't want to just consume one 60-minute workout. That's too much for me. I really like eating little microdosing movements throughout the day. I want a snack here and I want a snack here and I want a little bit every 60 minutes. And so what it tells you is that it says, go look at life and make it your jungle gym. Look for ramps, handicap ramps and railings off the banisters. Look for ways to hang off the sink when you wash your hands at your office. When you're filling your car with gas, go and pull off the, open window of your door. You look around and you're like, okay, when I'm walking my dog, there's a fence. Let me go hang off of it. You need to do regular microdosing. It's like drinking water. You don't just drink all 64 ounces once a day.
Yeah.
You do it throughout your day, right? You do it when your body is thirsty. And fascia actually has a reflex. It's supposed to tell you, just like your hunger reflex, just like your thirst reflex, it comes from the area of the brain where the sexual reflex, all your reflexes are, and it says, move. Go move. And I think that ADHD people probably have a much more hyper reflex to movement, now that I'm thinking about it. But for the listener, if you're not ADHD and you don't have the inclination to move, you can reignite that by doing a mindful every 30 to 60 minutes. I'm just going to do 3 tractions and I pull off and I move on. And that feels like you just took a nice big drink of water for your body. It's equivalent actually for hydrating your tissues and creating health in the body.
Okay, so if we do this
Yes.
exactly as prescribed, what will change?
The first thing that you will do is you will probably feel way fewer aches and pains, way less stiffness in your body, generally speaking. Your skin will feel less dry. It's almost like putting lotion, right? Motion is lotion. So you will feel less dehydrated, less achy, stiff, rigid. The next thing you're going to feel is a slight bit of elation. One of the fastest ways to change your stress state is to stretch your fascia. Your fascia is connected to your endorphin system, the way muscles are attached to your adrenal system. Muscles are your getaway car. They're like supposed to put you into adrenal cortisol quick response. But fascia is more like, I'm going to actually antidote that chemical response, and I want to give you calm, endorphin, parasympathetic, not sympathetic response. So when you start doing this throughout your day, your stress levels go down and you will actually feel a lightness in your being, a clarity, a point of lift, a point of suspension, because you're putting physical space in your body. It gives you elevated space and a sense of levity. And that's one of the things that actually most people tell me is that I end up craving GST because it really is this medicinal effect on my being, on how I feel, on the stresses of that I experience right? The mental loads that we are under as women, especially ADHD women whose brains tend to suffer a lot under mental load. If there's not organization, it can feel depressive to an ADHD brain to have that mental load. And so the next thing that you end up feeling is, I think, a sense of openness and receptivity, right? It almost makes you more available to the things in life. It's more of like a psychological state. So fascia is deeply wired to everything in your body. So those 3 things that I just went over match. Here's what you'll experience physically: hydration, lack of pain, lower inflammation, greater strength, on and on physically. But then it also spreads out into who you are as a person. And really, fascia is your organ of consciousness. It's the way you show up in your life, in your being. It helps you. And if you can control fascia, if you can learn to choose different movements to elicit fascial, it's called fascial animation, the way that fascia moves to move energy through your body, then you can actually really influence all different aspects of who you are and your life. It's not actually a hyperbole to be like, fascia will change your life. It's not hyperbole.
This is fascinating. So what you're saying is, when we feel stressed, when we feel overwhelmed, which we often can, when we feel anxious, the fix is to just go do a little bit of fascia therapy, right? And
That's right.
over time, it's neuroplasticity. You're going to change your brain to the point where you're going to crave this. You're going to know when you need it.
That's right. That's right.
I
It
love it.
becomes a way of lifestyle. You will want it. It's almost like our cravings are so funny. We usually crave good feelings. That's why we love sugar, right? It gives us a good feeling. We love our chocolate cake. So we have a hard time saying no to the things that make us feel good. And so what's really cool is that fascia feels so good, right? I don't do fitness. I don't work out. I don't like that. I don't like working out. I don't know very many people who actually like it. They do it because they know they should. It's like, I have to do it. And you're like, okay, well, what if you just craved yummy feelings in your body? The feeling of stretch feels yummy. The way chocolate feels yummy. The way of rotating, just lifting your rib cage and taking a huge breath. It's the number one thing. I get people to arch their spines. This is an arch where you arch your spine and they're like, oh my gosh, that feels so good. And I'm like, yeah, because it's the antidote for this stress posture, right? It's medicinal because we live like this, protective, contracted, stressed out. And it's like, oh, if you just do the openness, if you just do the opposite, your chest is lighter, your lung expand, you arch your back and you stimulate your vagus nerve and it creates de-stressing. And so it does. Fascia is it's a de-stressor. That's what it does. It de-stresses.
So, for those who are listening and not watching, what Anna did is she put her arms above her head and then she arched her back over the couch.
My chair.
Or chair
That's
that
right.
she's sitting in. You know where this is so brilliant? Exercise works for me. It makes me feel better. I've now, conditioned my brain where I wake up and I go right to, my Peloton or treadmill. I walk outside, whatever. It makes me feel better. And so that's why I do it. So people hate the word exercise. So I started to use the word movement. They hate the word movement.
Oh, yes.
There are some people who just don't want to do it, but they can do this. Because of what we always talk about is positive emotion, right? We're always looking for the positive emotion. So if you feel positive emotion from doing something right away, you're going to want to do more of it. It's human nature.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So I want you to tell me before I let you go, we've been going long, but this is so fascinating. Tell me
I'm so
about
glad.
your Ageless Body program.
Oh, I love it. Good. Yeah, the Ageless Body program was kind of just inspired because I was 18 and felt 80. And so I literally feel like I'm aging backwards. And I finally was so sick of being in LA for so many years and everybody just concerned about the aesthetics. And I'm like, what about the feel good? You get to an age, and especially women, where you're like, I can do 60 reps and I'm still losing my tone. And I'm like, what I really want to do is feel good for the rest of my life. And so Ageless Body was like, how can we instill these really important principles of longevity into our bodies and make a sustainable lifestyle of movement, which is what we need. It addresses our cognitive function, our hormonal balancing. It can, our joint health, our strength and osteoporosis. So I put together this really beautiful 10-week course that takes you deep into GST, what it is, how it works for you. You get to do these beautiful live movement experiences. It's not just on, we have pre-recorded stuff and we have live, because GST is really a living, breathing experience. It's not dead. It's not follow along and just do what I say. It's let's wake you up. Let's make you more alive by the senses you have, by the way you're communicating with your body. And so it's 10 weeks of really deep transformation, right? Exploring who you are on the inside from the inside, addressing concerns of aging, all the way from our joint health, all the way to our face and our, tonality, and how to also, I think, work with the psychology of aging, right? We have to supplant the lower vibrational pressures of aesthetics only and redefine better ideas of beauty as we age. Beauty is not just skin deep. It's who we are as women, the wisdom we've contained, cultivated, the depth of our soul. And so there's a journey there too that it's inseparable with fascia. Like the body and your being are one continuum, a continuum body of taking care of who you are and really coming to terms with what you have to offer this life, how to step into your authentic, being, and doing it through a somatic vehicle, which is really fun. I think a lot of people in coaching always do it from the mind, but if you do it from the building blocks of who you are inside your cells, I think it's a really profound change, a really profound permanence. I think it's a permanence inside of impermanence.
Well, ultimately, when we feel good, we do good, and
Yes.
we also look good,
Good.
right?
That's right.
I mean, like it all kind of good, more good. So,
I
and
love that.
this is an online program, right? That anybody can do.
Anybody can do. And it's all online. It does not mean that it's all pre-recorded. There's both, like I said. So online just means I have someone doing it from Switzerland right now, and it's really fun. She gets to, zoom into the classes and meet community and be with like-minded women. So it's really fun.
Okay, so Anna, what do you
Yes.
think the key to living successfully with ADHD is?
I think giving yourself a lot of grace and finding that your ADHD is not a liability, but it's your greatest superhero skill.
Yeah.
And that if you can learn to work with it and really let your creativity be inspired, then it's not so frenetic and it's not a liability. It's one of my greatest gifts.
Absolutely. I am convinced you could not do what you do without your ADHD. You make fascia interesting, which I think would be a stretch for most people. If people want to get a hold of you, they want to find out more about, the programs you run, the Ageless Body program, where do we send them? Where do you go?
Great. Go to gstbody.com. gstbody.com.
What does
And
that stand for?
Yeah, I know you don't want to know. This was an 18-year-old naming her company, and it stands for, this is the second iteration, Grid Flow Somatic Technology.
That's okay. That sounds like a pretty smart 18-year-old creating that.
It's an ADHD, a creativity. Yep.
GSTbody.com.
Go there.
If you
and then
missed
you'll
it,
find me. I have a website myself, but I just go there. That's where you can find out about Ageless Body. And we're doing a retreat this year in person. So anybody who wants to do a deep dive, you can come in August. We have limited spaces, but that's also another way to come and really experience how awesome GST can be. So great.
is that in Boulder? Is that where that's going to be? Boulder, Colorado?
It's in Estes Park, Colorado. It's about 45 minutes outside of Boulder, about an hour from DIA, Denver International Airport, very quick from most places. And it's right outside the Rocky Mountain National Park. So that's gorgeous. You'll see elk and moose and wildlife, and we're at my family homestead.
How long will it be?
It's 5 days, 4.5
Wow.
days. Yeah.
Sounds great. Well, thank you so much. We're going to have all of this in the show notes, by the way. So if you missed it, just go to the show notes on my website. Thank you so much, Anna. This is absolutely fascinating, and it makes so much sense.
Thank you. Thank you. That's the number one thing I hear is that it makes sense, and I want things that make sense.
Yeah, because I mean, it's all interconnected, right? Mental, physical,
everything in life.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, that is what I have for you for this week. If you liked this episode with Anna, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their amazing strengths. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you again, Anna.